Okay, so on this question, we're trying to solve d squared equals 15d. Let me bring it down here. D squared is 15d. Okay, so how do we solve an x squared or x cubed with an equal sign? That's what this chapter is all about. This last section of chapter 7, I should say, is solving when you have x squared or x cubed or d squared, whatever, with an equal sign. That's what's special. We have an equal sign. What do we do? Step 1, you've got to get a 0 on one side. It's always the first step. We have to get a 0 on one side. So to make that happen, put in a wall of separation here. Oops, missed one. There we go. Okay, so to make that happen, I'm gonna subtract 15d from both sides. Boom, boom, gonzo. What is the other side? D squared minus 15d. We good there? Not making sense? I just subtracted 15d from both sides. Why? Because I want to get a 0 on one side. That's the first step. You've got to get a 0 on one side. Now, if you want to do a shortcut, because we're going to be doing a lot of these, you can just grab the 15d and just jump it to the other side. And when it jumps to the other side, it's just going to switch signs. That'll always work. That's just a nice shortcut. All right, but we really just subtracted 15d from both sides. Okay, let's keep going. What do we do now? Step number 2 is to factor. So how do you factor? Well, remember the first step in the factoring. First step is you ask, is there anything in common? Do these two terms have anything in common? The answer is yes, they have a d in common. So you put the d, you take out the d, and you put the two things on the inside with the minus in between. Say d times what? D times d would go back to d squared, and d times what? D times 15 would go back to 15d. You tracking with me? So d times d is d squared, and d times 15 is 15d. So was there anything common? Yes, d. You take it out and you put one big parenthesis. Okay, now what? Well, we can't factor any further. Now how do I know that right away? Well, because this is just regular d. If this was like d squared here, and this was like 16, then I would factor further. I would go multiply, be 2 parentheses, d times d would be d squared, 4 times 4 would be 16. And I'd leave that other d in the front step, right? I'd put 1 plus, 1 minus, wouldn't I? But it's not, it's just regular d. And it's 15, which you can't do that. So, so because it's just regular d, it's not d squared, I'm done. The factoring is over. That's all the factoring we're going to do. Step number 3, set each part equal to 0. So I'm going to take that d alone equal to 0, or the d minus 15 equal to 0. Now, why is that? Well, that's because they were multiplying to equal 0. Right? So if the whole big expression, which has 2 parts to it, is multiplying to equal 0, well, that means the first part can be 0 or the second part can be 0. That's just logical, right? If 2 things are timesing to come out 0, well, either one of them can be 0, right? Because 0 times anything or anything times 0, right? The first one could be 0, 0 times anything would be 0, or the second one can be 0, anything times 0 would be 0, right? So the first one can be 0 or the second one can be 0, and then we finish those up. And so this one's done, and then this one we just add 15. When I say it's done, I mean d's already alone. The other one we add 15 to both sides like that. And this down, d equals 15. So we've got our 2 answers, 0 and 15. 0 and 15. So we come back up here, click on this 0, comma 15. Those are the two answers that make the equation true. We're done. We get D alone in both cases. Those are our two answers. You put them in either order. You can put the 15 first. You can go 15, comma 0. That's fine. It doesn't matter what order you put it in. I want to point out to you that it is true. We're done. That's the answer. But look how you can see it's true. If we plugged in 0 for D, right? We're saying 0 is an answer. We'll get to the 15 in a minute. We're saying first off, 0 works. Does it? Well, yeah, of course it does. Huh? 0 squared does equal 15 times 0. That's true. And how about the 15? If we plug in the 15, is 15 squared equal 15 times 15? Well, yeah, obviously, 15 squared is definitely equal to 15 times 15. So 0 and 15 really are answers to this equation. They both make the equation equal, make the left side equal the right side. They make it true, don't they? So how do we do it again? When you have an x squared or x cubed with an equal sign, step 1, get a 0 on one side. It's all about 0. Step 2, factor. So we took out the D they have in common. Then step 3, set each part equal to 0. Each part, the D alone, the D minus 15. Why? Because if two things multiplied equal 0, either one could be 0 to make that true. This one's done. D's alone. Get D alone over here. That one's done. There's our two answers. There we go.